Today, we are tackling a subject that I think a lot of people feel they should know, but if we're being honest, most of us only understand in really broad and probably slightly inaccurate strokes.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at the biological rhythm of the female body. And I don't just mean, periods.
No, definitely not. We're talking about a complex, timed orchestration of chemical signals and cellular suicides and structural rebuilding that repeats roughly every 28 days.
For decades.
For decades, yeah. It is arguably the most sophisticated timekeeping mechanism in all of human physiology.
It's basically a massive construction project that the body undertakes every single month just to tear it all down if it's not used.
Exactly.
And looking at our source material today, it is, well, it's heavy. We're diving into Chapter 82 of a major medical physiology text. The title is Female Physiology Before Pregnancy and Female Hormones.
Right. And as soon as you open a text like that, you realize we aren't just talking about reproduction in the sense of, making a baby. We're analyzing the physiological machinery before pregnancy.
The preparation phase.
The goal is to understand that preparation phase, how the body builds a potential home for a new life over and over and over again.
And our mission for this deep dive is to decode that jargon. I mean, we've got terms like GnRH, atresia, the proliferative phase. We wanted to turn that into a clear narrative.
Of course.
But beyond just the vocabulary,
Right.
why does this matter to you, the listener, who maybe isn't trying to get pregnant?
Well, because these hormones, estrogen and progesterone, they are not just sex hormones. It's kind of a misnomer. They are systemic regulators.
Systemic. What do you mean by that?
I mean, they dictate bone density, they change your metabolism, they alter your skin texture, they regulate your body temperature.
Even liver function, the text says.
And they even affect liver function, absolutely. So understanding this biology explains how the female body functions as a whole system. It's the operating system, not just some background app.
I love that analogy. It's the OS.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we want to understand the OS, we have to start with the hardware, the blueprint.
We do. We have to. And we can take a quick tour of the anatomy just to orient ourselves. I think most people know the landmarks, but the text frames them in a very specific way as a mission-oriented supply chain.
Okay, a supply chain. I like that.
Huh.
Let's map the territory then. We have the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, which the medical text calls uterine tubes, by the way.
Right, same thing.
The uterus and the vagina.
Correct. And if we look at the function, the mission of each part, the ovaries are the factory and the warehouse. They produce the product, which is the ovum, the egg.
Got it. Fecary.
Then the fallopian tubes are the logistics and transport network. That's where the meeting between egg and sperm actually happens. It's the meeting point.
And the uterus is the destination, the incubator.
Yep. The incubator, exactly. And if the product isn't used...
Then the uterus is also the demolition crew that resets the whole site for next month.
Precisely. But the most mind-blowing part of this story, for me, isn't really the anatomy itself. It's the timeline of the inventory. We have to talk about the origin of the egg, or what the book calls oogenesis.
This is where the numbers completely threw me off.
Yeah.
Because I think the general assumption is that similar to how men produce sperm continuously, the female body is just, making eggs as needed.
That is the common misconception, a huge one. Men are a production line, millions of new sperm every day, pretty much forever.
A constant factory.
A constant factory. Females are a depleting resource model. You get what you get, and that's it.
Okay, so let's trace this journey. The text talks about primordial germ cells. That sounds very fundamental. Where does this story even start?
It starts way before puberty. It starts before birth. If we look at a female embryo that's just a few weeks old, these primordial germ cells, the ancestors of every single egg a woman will ever have, they aren't even in the ovaries yet.
Wait, what? Where are they?
They originate in the yolk sac, which is technically outside the developing body of the embryo.
So they have to commute to work.
They essentially have to commute to work, they have to migrate, they travel along the mesentery of the hindgut, and eventually settle in the tissue that will become the ovaries. It's this long, guided chemical journey for a cell.
That is incredible. So they arrive at the future ovaries.
Yeah.
And then what? They set up shop.
They do, and they start multiplying like crazy. They become what are called oocygonia, and they just replicate and replicate and replicate,
The inventory.
building up that initial massive inventory. By the 5th month of fetal development, so the baby isn't even born yet, the ovaries contain about 1 to 2 million primary oocytes.
1 to 2 million, and you're saying that is the peak.
That is the absolute all-time peak. No new eggs are ever formed after that point. Full stop.
So the factory shuts down production before the person is even born.
Exactly. In fact, it gets crazier because by the time that baby girl is born, the number has already started to drop. Some of them have already died off. And by the time she reaches puberty, she has maybe 300,000 left.
So wait, let me get this straight. She goes from 2 million down to 300,000, and she hasn't even had her first cycle yet.
Correct. It's a massive game of attrition. The vast majority of the cells just degenerate. They undergo atresia. And it gets even starker. Over her entire reproductive life, a woman will only actually ovulate, release into the wild about 400 to 500 eggs.
Wow. So millions of potential eggs, a few 100,000 by puberty, and only 400 or 500 ever even get a chance.
The rest just dissolve. They're reabsorbed. It really highlights how biologically expensive this whole process is. The body selects only the very, very best candidates and ruthlessly discards the rest.
Now, you mentioned that these eggs are waiting. The text says they are arrested in Prophets Eye. That sounds like they're in jail.
In a way, they are. It's a perfect analogy. They're in a cellular prison of suspended animation.
Okay, break that down for us. Meiosis.
Right. So meiosis is the special process of cell division that creates reproductive cell sperm and eggs. It has two big stages. These eggs start that process when the girl is a fetus, but then they hit a red light. They get stuck in this first phase, prophase I.
Who pulls the red light? What keeps them from finishing the process?
It seems to be a chemical signal, a substance called oocyte maturation inhibiting factor.
A very descriptive name.
Very. It's secreted by the cells that are surrounding the egg, the granulosa cells, and it basically acts like a pause button. It keeps the eggs sleeping and dormant throughout infancy and all of childhood.
Okay, so they are sleeping, and then puberty is the wake-up call.
Puberty is when the brakes come off. But even then, only a few eggs get to wake up each month. The hypothalamus and pituitary glands start sending signals, which we'll get to, and a cohort of eggs is allowed to resume meiosis.
And this is where the genetics come in, right? Because regular cells have 46 chromosomes, but sex cells need half that, so 23.
Exactly. When that egg divides, it needs to have its genetic material so it can match up with the sperm's 23 chromosomes. But here's a weird detail that the text highlights. The division isn't equal.
What do you mean by that?
Usually when a cell splits, it creates two equal daughter cells.
Yeah.
But the egg needs to be packed with nutrients and machinery to survive the first few days after fertilization. It needs all the resources.
Okay.
So when it divides, it creates one big, juicy secondary oocyte, which keeps almost all the cytoplasm and the mitochondria and everything else. And the other half, it becomes this tiny little trash bag called the first apolar body.
So it sacrifices one to supercharge the other.
It does. It dumps the extra set of DNA into this polar body and just discards it. It's all about resource concentration. And here's the kicker. The egg stops again.
It hits another red light after all that.
Yes. It arrests in metaphase 2. It creates that secondary oocyte, ovulation happens, but the cell process isn't actually finished. It will only complete that final division if and only if it is fertilized by a sperm.
Get out of here. So an unfertilized egg that is ovulated and then shed during a period, it never actually finished meiosis.
Correct. It never reached its final biological form. It dies in that suspended state.
That is wild. It really redefines what we think of as a finished cell. Okay, so we have the supply, these sleeping eggs. Now we need to talk about the management. The text describes a hormonal hierarchy.
This is the control system. Think of it like a corporation.
Okay.
At the top, you have the CEO. That's the hypothalamus in the brain. It releases a hormone called GnRH, or gonadotropin-releasing hormone.
CEO hypothalamus. Who does the CEO talk to?
The CEO talks to the middle manager. That's the anterior pituitary gland, which sits right below the brain. The hypothalamus pulses out this GnRH, and the anterior pituitary responds by releasing two key hormones, FSH and LH.
Follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone.
Right. And these are the messengers. They travel through the blood all the way down to the workers on the factory floor, the ovaries.
And the ovaries are the ones doing the actual work.
They respond by doing two things: making the eggs mature inside their follicles and releasing their own hormones, estrogen and progesterone.
So just to recap for everyone, hypothalamus to pituitary to ovaries, GnRH to FSH-LH to estrogen, progesterone.
That's the chain of command. And everything runs on feedback loops. If the workers make too much product, like estrogen, they basically call the middle manager and say, hey, stop sending orders.
And that's negative feedback.
That's negative feedback.
Okay, let's look at the monthly production cycle. The text calls this the ovarian cycle. It starts with the follicular phase.
Follicular refers to the follicle. I think this is a point of confusion for people. The follicle isn't the egg. The follicle is the house the egg lives in.
The support structure.
Exactly. It's a ball of cells, these granulosa cells we mentioned, and another type called the FSCA cells.
And FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, is what gets this party started.
Yes. At the beginning of the cycle, right after a period, FSH levels rise slightly. This is the signal. It tells a group of dormant follicles, usually about 6 to 12 of them, to start growing.
This is the recruitment phase.
Recruitment is a good word. These follicles start proliferating, the granulosa cells multiply, and they start secreting fluid. This fluid collects in a cavity inside the follicle called the antrum.
An antrum, like a little lake inside the cell ball.
Exactly. A fluid-filled space. And this fluid is rich in estrogen. So as these 6 to 12 follicles grow, they are all pumping out estrogen into the woman's bloodstream.
But you said earlier that we only ovulate one egg, usually.
Right.
So what happens to the other 5 to 11?
This is the Hunger Games aspect of the ovary. It's called atresia. Again, one follicle, the one that got a slight head start or is just a little more sensitive to the hormones, becomes the dominant follicle.
How does it win? Does it, like, fight the others?
It wins by cutting off the supply lines. It's a bit more insidious than that. It produces the most estrogen. And remember that negative feedback loop.
High estrogen tells the pituitary to calm down.
To dial back the FSH, so the fuel for all the follicles starts to run out.
Ah, so it starves its competition.
Yes. But the dominant follicle has become so sensitive to FSH. It has developed so many receptors that it can survive on very little fuel. It can keep growing. But the smaller ones, they starve and die.
Wow. So it rises to the top and then kicks the ladder down.
It is ruthless biological efficiency. The smaller follicles involute and die off. This is the mechanism that ensures, typically, humans only have one baby at a time, not a litter.
Okay, so we have one winner. It's huge now. The text says it can grow to like 1 or 1.5 centimeters.
Which is enormous for a cellular structure. You could see it with the naked eye. It's bulging off the surface of the ovary like a blister.
And this brings us to the main event, ovulation. Roughly day 14 of the cycle.
The climax of the first half.
And this requires a specific trigger. We talked about FSH, but now it's LH's turn, right? Luteinizing hormone.
Yes. This is the LH surge. It's the most critical event. About 2 days before ovulation, the pituitary just dumps a massive amount of LH into the system. It's a huge spike.
And without that spike, nothing happens.
Without that surge, ovulation cannot happen. Full stop. It is the absolute trigger.
So what does all that LH do to that big dominant follicle?
It does a few things. First, it weakens the structural integrity of the follicle wall. It causes proteolytic enzymes, basically protein eaters, to start dissolving the capsule holding the egg in.
It's eating its way out.
It's preparing for the breakout, yeah. At the same time, it causes new blood vessels to grow rapidly into the follicle wall, a process called hyperammonemia, and it causes prostaglandin secretion.
So it weakens the wall and pumps it full of fluid.
Exactly. The follicle swells up, it gets bigger and bigger. It forms a little nipple-like protrusion on the surface of the ovary, which is called the stigma.
The stigma.
Yes. And eventually, the pressure becomes too great. The stigma ruptures and fluid oozes out, carrying the egg with it into the abdominal cavity.
Wait, into the abdominal cavity? Not directly into the fallopian tube?
Technically, yes. It bursts out into the open space of the peritoneum. It's not a closed system.
That seems risky.
It does, but the fallopian tube has these finger-like projections at the end called fimbriae, and they are constantly sweeping over the surface of the ovary. They're like a catcher's mitt.
So they're waiting to catch the egg.
They catch the egg and guide it into the tube. It's a high-stakes catch. If they miss, that's where you can get the egg just reabsorbing, or, in very rare cases, issues with ectopic placement outside the uterus. But usually, the fimbriae are very efficient. They sweep it right up.
So the egg is gone.
Yeah.
It's traveling down the tube, hoping to meet a sperm. But the story in the ovary isn't over.
No, and this is the part people often forget. The follicle that's left behind, the empty house, it transforms. It undergoes a process called luteinization.
And it becomes the corpus luteum.
The corpus luteum, which means yellow body.
Oh!
Because the cells that used to hold the egg, the granulosa and the pica cells, they fill up with lipids fats, and they take on a yellowish appearance under a microscope. And they change their job description entirely.
What do they do now?
They become a temporary endocrine gland, a hormone factory. Specifically, they start pumping out massive amounts of progesterone and also some estrogen.
Progesterone, we've heard that name. Progestation.
Exactly. Its name tells you its job. Ideally, that egg gets fertilized. If it does, it needs a nice, thick, nutrient-rich uterine lining to latch onto. The corpus luteum's job is to produce the progesterone that maintains that lining.
So it's the life support system for a potential pregnancy.
It is, for the first few weeks, until the placenta can develop and take over hormone production.
And if there is no baby, no fertilization,
Then the corpus luteum has a built-in timer. It has a genetically programmed lifespan of about 12 days.
a 12-day clock.
A 12-day clock. If it doesn't get a signal from a fertilized egg hormone called HCG, it just gives up. It self-destructs. It degenerates into white scar tissue called the corpus albicans, and it stops making hormones.
When it stops making hormones, that's the crash.
That's the crash. That sudden withdrawal of progesterone and estrogen is the signal that triggers menstruation. The cycle resets.
It's amazing how mechanical it is. It's literally a timer that either gets reset by pregnancy or it runs out.
It is biological clockwork of the highest order.
Okay, let's dive deeper into those hormones. Section 4 of our outline, the chemistry of womanhood. We have this duo, estrogen and progesterone.
The grower and the nurturer, that's really the best way to distinguish them.
So estrogen is the grower.
Yes. The primary estrogen is beta-estradiol. Its main job is proliferation. It makes cells divide. It makes organs get bigger. At puberty, it's estrogen that transforms the child's body into a woman's body.
How so?
The ovaries, the uterus, the fallopian tubes, the vagina, they all increase in size. It causes fat deposition in the breasts. It's the primary building hormone.
And progesterone is the nurturer.
Right. Progesterone is usually about secretory changes. It takes the tissue that estrogen built and makes it functional. It makes the uterine lining secrete nutrients. It prepares the breasts for lactation. It also quiets the uterus. It decreases contractions so a fertilized egg doesn't get shaken loose.
Okay, so one builds the house, the other furnishes it.
Perfect analogy.
Now, the synthesis of these hormones is really interesting. The text mentions they all start as cholesterol.
They do. All steroid hormones are lipids. They're made from fat. And there's a fascinating teamwork aspect that happens inside the follicle. You have those two cell types we mentioned, the theca cells and granulosa cells.
You're giving granulosa.
The theca cells are on the outside of the follicle. They take cholesterol from the blood, and under the influence of LH, they turn it into androgens, basically, testosterone-like hormones.
Wait. Ovaries make testosterone?
They do. It's the first step in the production line. But the theca cells can't turn that androgen into estrogen. They lack the necessary enzyme.
So they're stuck.
They're stuck. So they hand off the androgens to the granulosa cells on the inside. The granulosa cells, which are stimulated by FSH, have a special enzyme called aromatase.
Aromatase.
And they use aromatase to convert the testosterone into estrogen.
That is a very complicated handshake. Why not just have one cell do it all?
Biology often distributes labor to allow for finer control. LH stimulates the theca cells, and FSH stimulates the granulosa cells. It allows the system to fine-tune the ratio of hormones perfectly depending on where we are in the cycle. It's a two-cell, two-gonadotropin system.
Very clever. And we have to talk about the liver. The source material had a specific warning about liver function that I thought was really important.
Yes, this is clinically huge. The liver is the waste management plant for hormones. It takes estrogens, conjugates them, which means it makes them water-soluble, and then they can be excreted in bile or urine.
So it cleans them out of the system.
It has to. Estrogen is potent stuff. You don't want to just float around forever.
So what happens if the liver is damaged?
Yeah.
Like in someone with cirrhosis from alcoholism, for example.
The waste management fails. Estrogen, which is still being produced, can't be cleared. It builds up in the blood. This is a condition called hyperestronism.
An excess of estrogen.
An excess of estrogen. And even in men who have severe liver failure, you see signs of this, like breast development or spider veins, because their liver can't break down the small amounts of estrogen their bodies naturally produce.
That's wild. So liver health is directly tied to hormonal balance.
Absolutely. They are inextricably linked.
Let's talk more about those systemic effects. You mentioned earlier that estrogen affects things like bone density. Let's get into that.
This is one of the most critical long-term roles of estrogen, especially for understanding health after menopause. Bones are constantly being remodeled. You have cells called osteoclasts that break down bone and cells called osteoblasts that build it up. It's a constant tug of war.
Okay.
Estrogen acts as a powerful brake on the osteoclasts. It inhibits them. It stops them from eating too much bone.
So it protects bone mass.
It's a primary protector of the skeleton. But it also does something else very specific at puberty. It causes the fusion of the epiphyses, Those are the growth plates in the long bones.
Is that why girls usually stop growing tall earlier than boys do?
That is exactly why. Boys have less estrogen, so their growth plates stay open for a few more years, allowing them to have that later growth spurt. Estrogen is the signal that shuts that door. It says, okay, the skeleton is finished.
What about metabolism and skin?
Estrogen increases the overall metabolic rate slightly, but more importantly, it directs fat deposition. It signals the body to store fat preferentially in the buttocks, hips, and thighs, the classic female body shape.
And the skin.
As for skin, estrogen makes it softer and more vascular, meaning it has more blood vessels. It's why women's skin often feels warmer to the touch and can bleed more freely from a small cut than men's skin. It also thickens it compared to a child's skin.
So it's basically increasing blood flow and thickening the dermis.
Yes. In fact, the text notes they've found that giving estrogen to children with certain skin infections can help because it strengthens the skin barrier.
That's fascinating. Okay, let's move to section 5, the endometrial cycle.
Yeah.
This is how the uterus reacts to all these hormonal signals from the ovary.
Right. So while the ovary is doing its recruiting and ovulating, the uterus is going through its own parallel phases. It's listening to the ovary.
Phase 1, the proliferative phase. This lines up with the grower hormone, estrogen, right?
Correct. This is the first half of the cycle driven by the estrogen coming from that growing follicle. Just after menstruation, the uterine lining, the endometrium, is very thin, only a millimeter or two.
It's been scraped clean.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
Estrogen then signals the stromal cells and epithelial cells to multiply rapidly.
It's repaving the road.
It is. It's rebuilding from the ground up. The lining thickens from almost nothing to about 3 to 5 millimeters before ovulation. And importantly, the glands start to form and the blood supply grows. The cervical mucus changes too.
Oh, right. You mentioned this in passing, the fern pattern.
Yes. Under high estrogen, cervical mucus becomes thin, watery, and stringy. If you were to take a sample and dry it on a slide, it crystallizes into a pattern that looks like a fern leaf.
Why? What's the point of that?
It's crucial for fertility. That stringy texture creates literal channels that guide sperm up into the uterus. When mucus is thick and clumpy, it's like a barrier. When it's thin and fern-like, it's like opening the highway for sperm.
Now we have ovulation, and we enter phase 2, the secretory phase.
Now, progesterone from the new corpus luteum takes over. The lining doesn't get much thicker, but it gets much more complex and functional.
The nurturing phase.
The nurturing phase. The blood supply increases even more. The glands become tortuous, which means they get very twisted and coiled, and they start packing their cells with lipids and glycogen.
This is the food storage we talked about.
Yes. The text calls it uterine milk. It's a nutrient-rich secretion that is designed to feed a fertilized egg for the few days before it implants into the uterine wall. The uterus is basically becoming a fully stocked pantry.
But then, no fertilized egg arrives. The corpus luteum dies. Progesterone and estrogen drop off a cliff. And we hit phase 3, menstruation.
This is the dismantling phase. And the mechanism is really quite violent on a cellular level. When the hormones drop, it triggers intense vasospasm in the spiral arteries that supply the lining.
Vasospasm means they clamp down hard.
They cramp shut. This cuts off the blood supply to the top layers of the tissue. That tissue then undergoes necrosis. It dies from lack of oxygen.
So the cramps that people feel
Are partly those vasospasms and the uterine contractions that follow. The dying tissue releases inflammatory compounds called prostaglandins, which cause the uterus to contract to expel the contents.
So the necrotic layers of the lining separate from the uterus wall.
They do. Then the cramped vessels relax briefly, blood rushes in, pools under the dying tissue, and helps wash it all away. The total fluid lost is about 40 milliliters of blood and 35 milliliters of serous fluid.
The source notes something really interesting about the blood itself. It doesn't clot, usually.
Right, and this is key. Menstrual fluid contains a huge amount of an enzyme called fibrinolysin, which actively dissolves clots. This ensures the fluid can flow freely out of the body.
So if a woman sees clots,
It often means the bleeding is so heavy that it's outpacing the enzyme's ability to work. It's a sign of excessive blood flow.
and there's also something called leukorrhea.
Yes. During menstruation, the uterus releases a ton of leukocytes, white blood cells.
Yeah.
You have to remember, the lining is an open wound, technically. It's very vulnerable to infection. These white blood cells act as a security detail to prevent bacteria from traveling up from the vagina and taking hold.
That is a very, very smart adaptation. Okay, section 6, we need to talk about how this whole rhythm is regulated, the feedback loop.
This brings us back to the CEO in the brain, the hypothalamus, and its pulse.
Right, the text mentions that GnRH isn't released in a steady stream, it's pulsed.
Yes, in the follicular phase, it's about every 90 minutes. This is critical. If you were to give a woman a continuous IV drip of GnRH, the whole system would shut down.
Why? Wouldn't more be better?
No, the pituitary would stop responding. Its receptors would become desensitized. It needs the pulse, the on-off rhythm to function properly. It's a key part of the signaling.
So it's a frequency code, not just a volume code.
Exactly. And the feedback, as we said, is mostly negative. Estrogen goes up, the pituitary slows down FSH and LH. Progesterone goes up, the pituitary slows them down even more.
Plus, there's a specific blocker hormone called inhibin.
Right. Inhibin is secreted by the corpus luteum after ovulation, and it specifically targets FSH. It's a very precise signal. It tells the pituitary, we have an egg, we have a corpus luteum, do not start growing new follicles right now. It prevents a second pregnancy from starting while the first one is being considered.
But there's one huge glaring exception to this whole negative feedback rule. The positive feedback mystery just before ovulation.
This is one of the strangest and coolest things in all of physiology. Usually, as we said, estrogen inhibits LH, but for about 24 to 48 hours before ovulation, the estrogen level from that big dominant follicle gets super high. And suddenly, the pituitary flips a switch in its programming. Instead of being suppressed by the high estrogen, it gets excited by it.
It amplifies the signal instead of dampening it.
Yes. The highest estrogen triggers that massive ovulation-causing LH surge we talked about. It's a positive feedback loop. More estrogen leads to a huge burst of LH, which leads to ovulation. We still don't fully understand the molecular mechanism of why the switch flips, but without it, ovulation wouldn't happen.
It's like the system hits a critical threshold and the logic just completely reverses on itself.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
Moving on to section 7, the seasons of life. Puberty and menopause.
This is about the beginning and the end of the reproductive capability, the turning on and the turning off of the system.
So, puberty, you said earlier the eggs are there, they're sleeping. What changes to wake them up?
The brain changes. Before puberty, the hypothalamus is incredibly sensitive to negative feedback. Even the tiniest trace amounts of estrogen circulating in a child's body are enough to keep it quiet.
So it's easily inhibited.
Very easily. At puberty, for reasons we don't fully understand, the hypothalamus matures. It becomes much less sensitive. It stops listening to those quiet stop signals and starts pumping out GnRH in its characteristic pulses.
So the CEO gets more aggressive and starts sending out orders.
And the ovaries, which have been waiting all this time, finally get the message and respond. The first cycle, which is called menarche, usually happens between the ages of 11 and 15.
Then we fast forward several decades. Menopause. The text describes this as the burning out of the ovaries.
That's literally what it is. The ovaries run out of primordial follicles. Remember those 300,000 or so we started with at puberty? By the late 40s or early 50s, they are effectively gone.
So what happens to the hormones when there are no follicles left to respond?
Well, with no follicles, there's no estrogen or progesterone production to speak of. They plummet. But here's the interesting thing that you can see on a blood test. FSH and LH skyrocket. They go through the roof.
Why would they go up if the ovaries are shutting down?
Because the negative feedback loop is broken. The pituitary is screaming, grow, ovulate, by sending out tons and tons of FSH and LH. But the ovaries are empty. They can't answer.
So the middle manager is just yelling into a void.
Exactly, and it just keeps yelling louder and louder, which is why those hormone levels get so high.
And it's the lack of estrogen that creates the symptoms of menopause.
It is. The hot flashes, the anxiety, fatigue, changes in skin and hair. And the big one we touched on, osteoporosis.
Right. The brake on the bone-eating cells is gone.
The brake is gone. Without estrogen to inhibit the osteoclasts, they go into overdrive. They start eating bone tissue faster than it can be replaced. This is why postmenopausal women are at such a high risk for debilitating fractures of the hip and spine.
It's a really stark reminder of how protective these hormones are for the entire body, not just for reproduction.
It is. It changes the entire structural integrity of the body when they're gone.
Let's shift gears to Section 8, the female sexual act. The text draws some interesting parallels to male physiology.
It does. Physiologically, the sexual response is very similar. It relies on both the psychological drive and local physical stimulation.
And the anatomy is homologous in many ways. The clitoris is basically erectile tissue.
It is. It's controlled by the parasympathetic nerves, just like a male erection. the erectile tissue around the introitus, the vaginal opening, and in the clitoris itself swells with blood, causing it to become firm and enlarged.
And lubrication.
That's the Bartholin's glands. They're located just inside the labia minora. During sexual excitement, they secrete mucus to reduce friction, which is essential for intercourse.
What about orgasm?
Mm.
The text mentions a potential fertility role there, which I found fascinating.
This is a theory, but it's a compelling one. Orgasm involves rhythmic contractions of the perineal muscles, but the text points out that the uterus and fallopian tubes also contract rhythmically.
Okay.
The theory is that these uterine contractions create a sort of suction or a peristaltic wave that helps transport sperm from the vagina up through the uterus and toward the fallopian tubes.
So it's not just for pleasure. It might be a functional transport mechanism to help the sperm on their way.
It's possible, and we know that the hormone oxytocin is released during orgasm, which also promotes uterine motility, so it certainly seems plausible that it helps move things along.
Okay, section 9. Fertility, contraception, and some common abnormalities. This is where the rubber meets the road for a lot of you listening.
Right, the practical application. Let's start with the fertile window. This is basically a math problem.
Okay, give me the variables.
Variable 1. Sperm can live inside the female reproductive tract for up to 5 days. They're quite resilient.
5 days. Okay.
Variable 2. The ovum, the egg, is very fragile. It lives only about 24 hours after it's ovulated.
So if you have intercourse 4 days before ovulation,
You can get pregnant. The sperm are just hanging out waiting for the egg to show up. But if you have sex 2 days after ovulation, the egg is already gone. Too late.
so the window is roughly 4 to 5 days before ovulation plus 1 day after. That's the zone of highest probability.
That's the zone, correct.
What about the rhythm method? Just trying to avoid that window.
The text notes a very high failure rate, something like 20 to 25%. The problem is that biological cycles vary. Stress, illness, travel, diet, anything can shift ovulation by a few days.
So your math is based on a prediction that might be wrong.
Exactly. If you predict ovulation on day 14, but it happens on day 12 this month, and you had sex on day 8, well, the math catches up with you.
Let's talk about the pill. How does hormonal suppression actually work to prevent pregnancy?
It basically tricks the brain. By taking a constant, steady dose of synthetic estrogen and/or progesterone, you are telling the hypothalamus, we're potentially pregnant, or we have plenty of hormones, no need to make more.
So it creates that powerful negative feedback loop we talked about.
Exactly. It suppresses the pituitary's release of FSH, so follicles don't grow. But crucially, it completely inhibits the LH surge.
And no LH surge.
Means no ovulation. The main event never happens, the ovaries just stay dormant.
It puts the ovaries back to sleep, in a way.
Effectively, yes. It's a pharmacological pause button.
Finally, let's touch on a few abnormalities mentioned in the text. Anovulatory cycles.
This means having a menstrual cycle, bleeding, but without ever ovulating an egg.
How does that happen?
It's common at the very beginning of puberty and the very end near menopause. The hormones fluctuate enough to build up a uterine lining and then drop enough to shed it, but the LH surge never gets high enough to actually pop an egg out of a follicle. So no corpus luteum forms.
And endometriosis. That's something you hear about a lot.
This is a very painful condition where endometrial tissue, the stuff that's supposed to line the uterus, grows outside the uterus. It can grow on the ovaries, on the bowel, anywhere in the pelvic cavity.
And since it's endometrial tissue, it responds to the monthly hormonal cycle,
Yeah,
right?
that's the problem, exactly. When the hormones say bleed, this misplaced tissue bleeds, but the blood has nowhere to go. It gets trapped, causes intense inflammation, scarring, fibrosis. It can confuse the anatomy so much that it causes infertility.
And one more, salpingitis.
That's just a fancy word for inflammation of the fallopian tubes, the salpinges. It's often caused by sexually transmitted infections like gonorrhea.
And what's the danger there?
It scars the inside of the tubes. If the tube is blocked by scar tissue, the egg can't meet the sperm, or worse, a fertilized egg gets stuck in the tube and creates a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground, from the migration of cells in an embryo all the way to the chemistry of the pill.
It is a lot. It's an entire field of study.
So let's try to synthesize this for everyone. What is the big overarching takeaway?
For me, it's the complexity of the balance, the sheer elegance of it. You have this delicate dance between the brain and the ovaries, communicating via these precise chemical pulses. You have positive feedback, flipping to negative feedback on a dime. You have this constant resource-intensive process of building up and tearing down.
It's a high-energy, high-stakes system.
Extremely. And it's relentless. It happens every single month, regardless of whether a pregnancy ever occurs.
Until the resources run out.
Until the resources run out.
And that leads to my final thought for you, the listener. We often hear the term biological clock, used in a social pressure kind of way. Oh, your clock is ticking.
Right. It has that connotation.
But looking at this physiology, the clock is literally real. It's not a metaphor. It's a physical countdown of follicles that started before you were even born. You start with millions, and you end inexorably with none.
It reframes the female body not as a static vessel, but as a dynamic, depleting biological event that's running on a preset timer.
Exactly. And so my question is, how does knowing that your body spends decades practicing for a pregnancy that might never happen, running this incredibly complex program over and over, change how we view human biology? It's almost, irrationally optimistic, or maybe just incredibly stubbornly persistent.
It's life pushing to continue itself at a cellular level every single month, against all odds.
Fascinating stuff. I hope this deep dive gave you a new appreciation for the intricate chemical dance happening inside the body right now.
Thanks for listening.
See you on the next deep dive.